Alright guys, you already know who it is. And after milking out the absolute shit out of Reich, I decided it was time to finally check out a mod based around the idea of what if Germany won World War I. Wait, no, that's Reich. What if Germany won World War II? Now, starting off, I could tell I was in for quite the ride. There was plenty of decisions to make in our decision-making tab. Also, not to mention all the terror attacks that we were going to have to deal with, including before and during the Civil War. After that, I knew things were about to get really shaky here. One of the very first things I did was I sent troops to Iran to help them in their civil war. Also, I was able to fix the SS infighting. However, that was only going to be the first of many problems to fix. Also, being a HOI4 mod, you know we had to do it. I mean, come on, where's there a universe where there isn't Middle Eastern conflict, guys? Sadly though, I don't think Mr. Mustachio Man's gonna live long enough to see any sort of conflict happening. Also, to make matters worse, France is now in a full-blown civil war, this being the fascist government versus de Gaulle here. I immediately went and sent 16 armor divisions, hoping that would be enough. And knowing this may be their only chance to retake back Europe, the Entente decides to go and intervene. Also, the world events in this game is just absolutely crazy. Up to this point though, the situation in France is not going too well, to say the least. It has just been an onslaught in France, with all the Accord members sending troops to the front lines. And finally it happened. The Fuhrer was dead. At this point in the game, things were really starting to pick up here, and I wasn't sure how long I was going to be able to hold on for. But not long after, the Caucasus went into full discourse, because what's a Reich without a Fuhrer? And just trailing behind, Ukraine goes and blows up. Now there was some Nazi holdouts, but I wasn't exactly sure how long they would hold on for. And not only was my puppet countries breaking away from me, so was my allies. Apparently nobody wants to be your friend when you're no longer the toughest kid in school. But not only was I having some trouble, even Italy's allies were starting to break apart. Also, apparently Bormann is trying to create an alliance with Himmler to take over the government. But before getting a vote of no confidence, Bormann finally gives in and gives way for a new election. But actually, just kidding, he doesn't. And not long after, Speer and Goebbels oust Bormann. And we get a choice between Speer and Goebbels. And of course, we go with Goebbels, the master of propaganda. Unfortunately for Goebbels though, he would not see a period of grace, as immediately the Waffen-SS and the Wehrmacht started shooting at each other because, I don't know, bullets are fun I guess. And finally, the German Civil War had kicked off. Just looking at the situation we were in, I wasn't exactly confident in how this would pan out. But even with all the cards against us, I set my front lines up and prepared an offensive. And not long after, the general government here in Poland declares a state of neutrality to avoid any unforeseen problems. Luckily though, it does seem we ended up with most of the air. However, our troops were a little slow to get to the front line, and soon things started to collapse. As for now, it was not looking good for Goebbels. Also, Ostland goes into a civil war because wars are fun, I guess. And just looking at our casualties, it is not going well for us. Even the general government that stayed neutral went into a civil war. Also, this map was really starting to get hard to look at. Luckily for us, the front line did start to stabilize a bit, and after holding out for a while, I finally went on the offensive here. However, this offensive wouldn't last forever, because with the Civil War ongoing, the Accord took the chance and declared war. Now, I could have went for a ceasefire here in the Civil War, but me being so arrogant, I said no, because I thought I could take out the rest of the Germans before the Accord came. I quickly amped up my offensive here, trying to end it as fast as possible before any of the Brits or Americans came. And surprisingly, things were starting to go well. I captured lots of little pockets, and even cut the Wehrmacht in two. And with just a little bit of strategic maneuvering, I had pretty much taken all of Prussia. But then, it all hit me. The Brits had landed. I quickly sent over troops trying to regain whatever was lost, but it was too late. Even the US had landed on my soil. I quickly finished off Prussia, hoping to send them back to the west to defend against the Brits and the Americans. But the situation was starting to get really dire, as some of my lines were only a tile thick. And sadly, not long after, my army was completely split in half. At this point, the pressure was really on. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, a second naval invasion had hit. I quickly tried to hold out and make some gains here in the west, However, my eastern half of the army was completely unorganized and I was quickly losing ground. Luckily though, my western half of the army was holding pretty well, so much so the Accord just simply stopped attacking. For my eastern half of the army, I tried taking back as many ports as possible, but it was all pointless, for the Accord was simply taking out my entire air force and navy. And just to make things a little better, the UN backs the entire war against us. At this point, I knew things were a lost cause. All I had left was to just simply hold out. Also, just to make things a little easier, the Accord went in for a third naval invasion. At this point, I frantically started putting makeup on, because if I'm gonna get fucked, I might as well at least look pretty. But in all seriousness though, things were not looking good. It was only a matter of months until we fell. Also, even though the Accord was quickly winning, they decided to drop a nuclear bomb on Frankfurt. Just for shits and gigs, you know? Also, just looking at our kill to death ratio, it was embarrassing. We hadn't even killed 10,000 Americans, and almost 500,000 Germans were already dead. Also, just to rub sand into the wound, Italy had just been sitting there the entire time, you know, our greatest ally from World War II. At this point, I don't know what Mussolini's doing, probably fondling his balls in Rome. And just to make matters worse, our entire army was split in 3 now, with a western, middle, and eastern section. At this point, we lost most of our territory. We were holding no major cities. I was even surprised that we were still holding on. I guess the mods must have buffed the surrender limit, because this was atrocious. At this point, all I had left was small little pockets. It kind of makes me feel bad for our last guy standing, like you were defending nothing at this point. After holding for so long, all I had left was 2 little pockets, both on the opposite ends of the country. At this point, it was a race between which pocket would hold on the longest. And surprisingly, it looks like the eastern flank will win, as the western pocket was entirely encircled. Weirdly enough, the Accord had left the entire pocket alone, so I frantically went to try to make as minimal gains as possible. However, our offensive had came to no avail, as the Accord quickly started pushing back. And even with 1 tile left, we still somehow got a terrorist attack. Like, come on guys, we don't have much to patrol here. But sadly, not even a second later, we had capitulated. The city was gone. But I will say it is sad to see. Our once great empire turned into nothing more but a UN puppet state. But hey, I tried my best. And that's all that matters. But I don't really know how to end this video, so I'm just gonna go jerk it. See ya.
What a fucking
Nixter 27